everybody, and welcome to the latest edition of the Techstrong Gang. I'm your host, Mike Wizard. Alan Schindel is, of course, still on vacation, but he'll be coming back any day now. In the meantime, we're going to be talking about Gartner, AI, and hype cycles, and we're also then going to talk about the future of the IT team, because they're going to be able to build all kinds of interesting applications in a way that's much easier. And then finally, Bonnie's going to take us through how FinOps and sustainability are about to converge. You're watching Techstrong. All right, folks, welcome back. Let me introduce the gang for today. We have Paul Nashawaty, who's joining us from, I believe, North Carolina still. Is that true?
That is very true. Yes, it is.
All right. And then after that, Paul is the practice lead for application development for Futurum, by the way. And then we have our own John Schwartz, who kind of works for Futurum and Techstrong gang, but he's out on the West Coast. John, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here.
And then finally, we have Mark Hinkle, one of the regular gang members, is returning. He's one of our resident AI experts. Mark, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
And finally, of course, we have Bonnie Schneider, our resident expert on all things green, IT, and climate change. Good to see you as always.
Good to see you, Mike. Thanks.
All right, folks, let's get started with this AI stuff and the Gartner hype cycle. I've never been a big fan, and I think everybody kind of knows that. But hey, we have to measure something along the way. And one of the things that seemed to come out in this Gartner hype cycle is it felt to me, Mark, that the more realization is setting in about how long it will take us to get the benefits of investments in AI. It seemed like last year everybody was kind of maybe engaged in a little irrational exuberance. And so are we growing up here, or what's going on, Mark?
Well, I think that's with every new tech and shiny object. Everybody gets excited. And then the framework for Gartner's all right. I don't know about their insight is the trough of inflated expectations. But this, AI, the foundational stuff that's happening today is real. But when you see the crazy amount of investment in startups and new products coming out, or they're not really products. They come out as betas and people are like, yes, this is, OpenAI Sora. Everybody got excited about it, but we're not out making movies yet with OpenAI Sora. I think it's, it's foreshadowing, and it happened in the internet. We all thought that the world was going to change overnight. And, 24 years later, we were reaping the benefits. I don't think that's the same, length that we'll spend for AI, but, it's moving a little faster, but it's still the same thing.
Right. John, to Mark's point, when I was out in the valley for the .com bubble, are the bubbles kind of exploding faster? It seems like we're
they are.
Through this cycle.
That's a great observation, Mike. Yeah, they are. But everything's faster, right? And every successive bubble seems to expand faster. I was going to say burst, but expands faster. And I think even the Gartner analyst acknowledges that. There's a quote here where he mentions that the CEOs in particular tend to be optimistic and bullish about any new type of technology or novel technology, and about 87% of the CEOs agree the benefits of AI to their business outweigh its risks. Yet, at the same time, I think only 4% of the businesses they talk to use AI to produce goods and services, and most of those the highest concentration come in tech, so they are the early adopters. But you're right, it's going to take a lot longer for this to seam its way through other industries.
And Paul, welcome to the show. Have we always kind of overestimated the impact that IT actually has on productivity? I mean, it's interesting that Gartner's talking about there'll be a boost in productivity, but if I go back in time, those productivity numbers don't really move all that fast just because we have invested in IT. So how should we kind of evaluate our investments in AI? What's some more context about what exactly IT does for productivity?
This is thanks for having me, Mike, on the show. This is a really hot topic. And when I look at my research and kind of layered across the hype cycle from Gartner, there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some differences. And one of the differences that I notice is AI is being used to address some of the skill gap issues, also being addressed to your point, for productivity and to increase the delivery of applications. What we found 9 months ago was there was a 18% of respondents to our survey indicated that they're using AI in their production workloads. We reran that study recently, and after 9 months, that number jumped from 18% to 54% of AI being in production workloads. So the adoption of AI is coming. It's coming fast. Why is that? Well, what we're finding is there's a need to drive more applications and more insights to these applications, and create these tools faster. And by utilizing AI, it allows these organizations to have an accelerator to do the job that previously would have taken more man hours to do. So I believe that there's a desire to utilize these tools. I think that this is an evolution, and there's certainly a maturity curve that has to occur here as well.
I agree with that maturity curve, because I think that one of the obstacles in implementing this is getting, when you're leaning into AI, to be more productive. Sometimes in the beginning, it might make you feel like you're being less productive because you're getting over, okay, can AI do this? No, that doesn't look right. Let's try something else, or trying different, leaning into different models to get better solutions. So it's tempting to spend a lot of time on AI and then say, well, this isn't actually making me more productive. So I think getting over that hump is important.
I think there's usually a large gap between what the IT people see as a possibility and what normal humans can kind of pull together. But Mark, I wonder if we overemphasize these large language models, and maybe the great innovation that's about to come is these more domain-specific language models, the smaller language models that are maybe easier to deploy at the edge. And the second wave of this thing may be more profound than the first wave.
Yeah. I mean, I think when they came out, the old adage that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail applies. And so everybody was saying, oh, I could do this and that. And I think where it's really good is at helping us sift through data, draw insights, and take the massive amount of data that we have and get through it more effectively. But where we're at today, there's lots of talk about agents and automation and other things. And it's just, there's a big gap between its ability to sift through data or generate images versus actually, exhibit some kind of intelligence and reasoning. And that's the gap that we're going to see for the foreseeable future.
Oh, one of the things that strikes me too is that it's not just end users where there's a gap with adoption of new tech, but developers, it takes them a while to kind of wrap their heads around things and how to use things. And I'm sure there's tons of proof of concepts out there, but what's your sense how proficient are developers these days incorporating AI into their applications?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think about the incorporation of the new tech stack and the new tools to accelerate the job, businesses there was two things. One, we tend to be, and just as human nature, tend to be creatures of habit. We use what we know. We perform better with what we know. But organizations are changing their KPIs in order to release code more rapidly. Actually, we're seeing in our research that 24% of organizations are trying to release code on an hourly basis, but yet only 8% are able to do so. And that's largely due to the heritage tech stack that they're using. So with that said, developers are basically looking at these new tech stacks in order to adopt new skills in order to do their jobs more efficiently, more effectively. And that's largely driven from the demands that are put on them. There's also increasingly been a shift moving from day 2, day 1 to day 0. So shift left kind of mentality of not just on security, but across the board. Testing, QA, anything in the CI/CD pipeline for the SDLC is impacted by that shift left mentality. So developers are looking for ways to automate and use the right tools in order to be more effective, in order to have their jobs, to do their jobs. We're also seeing that maintenance mode for a lot of these applications is still a good percentage. It's still a third of the time that's spent. Actually, I'm sorry, it takes 2/3 of the time for most developers are spending in maintenance mode, and a third of their time is spent on innovation. And that seems to be an area where developers are looking at how to grow their own skill and grow their own desire to do the job. So focus on innovation requires understanding new tech stacks, requires basically delivering code faster and applications faster.
Hey, Mike, can I mention some of the industries that I think actually going to be early adopters? I know in the report they mentioned manufacturing and healthcare, but we have a story coming out, which just came out today on Thursday, about contact centers. This is kind of the contrarian view, where they are actually adopting this. And one of the companies that I know is very, very engaged is United. They see this opportunity, even among their customer service agents who are open to the idea of using AI to kind of reduce the redundancy in their jobs and let them do other things. I know this, we always hear this, and there is a threat to some of maybe many of their jobs, but there's this value that they see in this. And maybe they start off, maybe this one industry that we look at as being most endangered by AI actually might be one of the early adopters and pioneers that show others how to use it along with human beings at the same time.
I'm going to be a little cynical. Are there certain industries where the customer service is just so abysmal that AI couldn't make it any worse? So what the hell?
Yeah, that's part of it, right? You eliminate, the easy solution, right? That sometimes we can't find in the loop.
Wow. Yeah, and especially customer service where it's all about people complaining. You'd rather have AI.
Right.
It's much more patient than a human, yeah.
I mean, I'll digress for a minute, but yeah, I had a misadventure involving an airline. I won't beat them up too much about it, but it was pretty clear to me that the issue was that the people behind the counter just didn't know how to use the software that they were being presented with. So this task that they were trying to do was just way more complex and couldn't actually switch a flight standing there, even though I'm watching other people get their ticket switched because the other person seemed to know the software better.
Well, that seems to be the running pattern. All these studies and surveys show the training always lags behind the adoption. And, they throw this in technology in front of someone and say, okay, use it. It's going to make you more productive. But the amount of training that goes into this just never seems to meet their standards.
So, John, what is the mood in the Valley? Because we talked about this Goldman Sachs report on a previous show, and I don't think you were on it, but it was pointing out that the investment cycle for benefiting from AI for a lot of these companies is going to be more extended than maybe initially thought. And there is a lot of money floating around in the Valley tied to these AI projects. Will they all kind of survive, or are we going to see them all kind of die in the vine for lack of revenue because it's just taking longer than they anticipated?
Remember when you were out here during the dot-com bomb, the dot bomb era? There are going to be companies that are just going to go away, wither away. There are those who are going to be acquired. They're looking for an exit strategy when they realize that they don't have the revenue stream they thought they did. A lot of them are going to be squeezed by the big tech companies. That's unavoidable, I think. So there's a bit of panic that will set in. Right now, there's this kind of gold rush mentality, but then stark reality hits, and that's when you start seeing a lot of movement, and most of it's going to be bad.
Yeah. One of the things I regularly enjoy when I do go out to San Francisco is driving down 101 and looking at all the billboards of companies I never heard of, and I have no idea what they do. But
half of them are going to be out of business in a year or so after they put up their billboards. I mean, especially there are exceptions like Twilio and some others and Salesforce, but for the most part, you're right, Mike. It was like a marker, landmarks of, okay, that one's gone. This one has no chance. This one probably has a chance. You could almost bet on half of them being gone.
Mark, is there a big giant roll-up coming or what?
Well, I think it's going to be a lot. Like there is a similarity to the .com era, but I think the technologies will keep going. I mean, I'm talking to you on a Chrome browser plugin using JavaScript, and that's an artifact of Netscape, which went public in 1995 and had 100% run up on its IPO. And if we're talking internationally, Global Crossing raised, I think, billions of dollars to lay those cables across the country, and they got bought up by pennies on the dollar. So the artifacts or the technologies and the infrastructure is going to live on. But, anybody that takes the kinds of ridiculous amounts of capital and thinks they're going to provide a return on investment, I think I'd rather buy lottery tickets.
Paul, what do you tell people who are developers today about AI? Should they go work for startups, or should they be looking more towards the companies that are going to implement this stuff? And maybe that's where the action is going to be.
Well, I think I'll take a little bit different stance to the conversation here. I focus, as we know and kind of pointed out, I focus on the developer and the DevOps and the platform engineering teams. That's my persona that I go after and I talk to. And all the companies and vendors that work in this space are building solutions and solving problems that are addressing anything in the SDLC, in the software development lifecycle. Now, there's a big difference between what we've learned over the years and, from historical kind of areas where things kind of rise and fall. I think there's a big difference now is the market in the tech space is very cyclical. And what we find is this innovation is being born out of necessity. If you take a look at the CNCF landscape, for example, if you go to KubeCon or any of the associated shows around that, there's a significant amount of point solution vendors. And I agree with the folks on this call saying that, not all of those vendors are going to survive, and that's fair. However, I do see in this space is because of the open source ecosystem and because of the openness of this ecosystem, there's going to be, and it's happening now, and there will continue to grow, is a consolidation of not just partnerships, but acquisition. So we're going to see this constricting and kind of ebb and flow of the tech stack, where there's a need to build out those point solutions to help drive the inefficiencies in the CI/CD pipeline, or as well as the SDLC. But we're also going to see some of these companies basically emerge as the front runners, and those are the ones that are going to drive the business forward. So you'll see, just to sum that up real quick, we're going to see kind of that bifurcated approach where a lot of these tech stacks will be, if they're not already in open source, they'll be open source, and then the commercialized version of it will be then incorporated into a way to monetize for these consolidation of these companies together. So, to answer your question, Mike, it really depends on the developer's needs and what they're looking to do for their own career path. I think it's very rewarding to fix a problem that you know is out there, which goes back to my point of developers like to innovate. They don't like to be in maintenance mode. So if they're starting out in the startup world and they're innovating, that's attractive to developers. That's the direction I would recommend. But if you're looking for some more stability and some more focus on product that are in market, maybe the larger companies are the right way for you.
I would just say proceed with a certain amount of care. And John, you know this, and maybe this is one of the dirty little secrets.
Yep.
And then one of the dirty little secrets of IT and venture capitalism is the VC firms are kind of like movie studios, right? There's probably about a dozen of them that really drive. And they all kind of magically seem to come up with the same investments in the same area at the same time. And then there's like 15 companies that are all trying to compete in this tiny little sliver of a spot. And then, like a lot of the movies that the producers put out there, a third of them never get made because they just die on the vine. And then the other third probably get, rolled up in different movies where different studios get together and they create a movie because they were all making the same movie.
Can I make an analogy? Remember back in the late 60s when Easy Rider came out? Mm-hmm. It was something so different, so unique that all the studios decided we're going to make a biker movie. We're going to make a counterculture movie. They all tried. It didn't always work. Often it didn't work, and it ruined a lot of studios temporarily. And I think the same type of principle applies. So I think you're dead on about this VCIT dynamic.
Right. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing because it takes the risk of investing in new technologies off of, say, a major company that they're hoping will buy that company. And I think most of these startups are never really designed to go public per se. I mean, when it happens, great. But for the most part, it seems to be, shall we say, built to flip is about the best way I can describe it. But Mark, am I overstating the case?
There's so much I want to say there, Mike. I think that I just look at it like tulip mania of the 1600s is when tulips became a worldwide thing, everybody wanted them. They're spending the equivalent of a year's salary on tulip bulbs, not individually, but that's just sort of the analogy. And everybody went crazy about tulips. And what happens now is I can go in and get a pack of tulips for, $5 at Lowe's, and they're everywhere and they're not special. So, people are emotional when they're with their investments, and this whole venture capital model, those guys get paid their management fees, whether they make money or not. And, I think it's, a matter of incentives. The incentives are to put that capital to work, and the entrepreneur's incentives are to make money. But, they're playing against this with a stacked deck, because you just never can get escape velocity at these, $1 billion round for AI training, like Scale just raised, or, 400 million here, $500 million there. It's crazy.
All right, folks, I'm going to leave the AI irrational exuberance conversation here, and we'll be back in a minute.
Discover how cloud native is becoming the new compute stack. At Cloud Native Now on July 25th, we will explore the transformative shift towards modern containerized and microservices-based applications. Learn why Kubernetes remains a dominant force in container orchestration and how WebAssembly is emerging as a powerful complement. Don't miss this opportunity to stay ahead in cloud native development. Register now and claim your spot in the future of tech innovation.
All right, folks, and we're back, and we're talking about AI again, but this time with a slightly different spin. AWS has been showing a tool that would enable a traditional IT team that might have built an app in the past to create an app instead of using a low-code tool in a database, or if you really want to reach back in time, something like Lotus Notes, to build an app for the HR department, or they used all these extensions, and there are a lot of internal-facing apps that IT teams built. And this one is low-code tool, natural language interface, type in what you want, and it will just pop out that app at the other end of it. And I think what's happening here, maybe, and we'll see, but Paul, I know you were at the event, but the role of the IT team internally might be changing, because if we do give them these Gen AI tools and they can pop out a new app in, let's say days, does the whole relationship of what that IT team that actually does for the organization kind of change and evolve, because maybe that application backlog starts to just kind of disappear?
Yeah, I think that's really great. Kind of segue to the delivery of these new applications and how these applications are coming together. So Amazon did allow announce last week or so the ability to produce these applications much faster, and by doing so, there's risk to doing that, right? When you bring these applications and bring them to market much faster, you have to do sounding of these applications, or grounding, I should say, of these applications, right? To make sure that the applications are delivering the results you're looking for. And when the announcements that came out of AWS and a lot of the other vendors are starting to do this as well, and making that developer velocity much faster by introducing ways to create applications without having to have the full-on developer experience. Now, there's kind of goods and bads to that. It's that whole garbage in, garbage out model, where if you don't have the right prompts or the right things you want to ask for, you're going to create a less desirable application. However, if you create, know what you're looking for as the end user of that application, or as the line of business for that application, and you're looking to develop it, you may produce the right prompts. But what I like about the approach that AWS did at their announcement, as well as some other vendors are doing, is that they're doing things like fine tuning for the data that comes in, embracing things like Amazon Q and SageMaker that kind of help that kind of driving of the user-friendly interface that allows for that, quote, citizen developer or the line of business to develop their applications faster. But also doing things like connecting tools like Bedrock and knowledge bases together allows for the AI creation. Like, so Mike, you were talking about that natural language and creation of those applications using prompts and such. That's really an attractiveness, as well as I mentioned grounding. And this is something that early on, and when AI first came out, and it's getting a lot better now, but when AI first came out, there was a lot of hallucinations. There was a lot of data quality issues. This is getting better. And having those data sources, whether it's a large language model or a small language model, from the core to edge to cloud or wherever that data may reside, grounding is a big part of it. And that's an important part. But the big focus, or one of the big focuses from the event that AWS was driving, is this new era of builders, and using the Q apps or Amazon Q apps in order to do that allows for IT organizations to do that. Again, going back to what I said previously in the segment, having the developers focus on innovation and rather than focus on maintenance. But this is a double-edged sword, because if you create a lot of applications, somebody has to make sure that those applications are, properly regulated in governance and compliance and following the business practices. And guardrails is a way to do that, right? To make sure that you have a way to provide that. And guardrails, just to be clear, there's a product called Guardrails, and there's also just general guardrails in your organization to do so. So as long as IT is overseeing the creation, delegating that work out to the lines of business seems to be the desirable approach.
I don't know, Mark, I'm trying to struggle with this in my mind these days and I'd love to get your input here. The question has always been, so we have professional developers and DevOps teams, and they've been building applications for folks using internal and external. If the IT team now can go build their own apps using a AI tool, and Paul also mentioned another tool that AWS has where basically they're saying end users can also create their own applications, and they can use that application will get generated by a few prompts that you type in, and it will create a personal app for you essentially, and that application will be easier to create than it would be for you to go find one in a repository and actually learn how to use it. So they're basically saying everybody and his brother will start creating their own apps, and they might be redundant or whatever, but they'll be highly personalized. But be that as it may, what will be the role of the professional developers and DevOps teams if end users and IT folks are building more of applications themselves? And how does that all come together in your mind?
Well, I mean, I think that it, for anything important, there still needs to be some level of governance and rigor and analysis. I don't think that these apps will get that great for a lot of your key enterprise apps, but you may have, I think John earlier was talking about the productivity and skills gap. I think that's where those apps are going to fill in. But at the end of the day, if you're touching enterprise data, highly sensitive, highly correlated to revenue, I still think there's going to be central AI, a central app, and maybe AI will just help, as a copilot. This copilot model is probably more what it'll look like in an enterprise software setting.
All right. So, Paul, let's come back to that because, again, maybe being overly cynical, but there's a lot of apps that we ask professional developers to go build, and they get on this list of things that they're supposed to work on. And frankly, they're kind of boring, tedious, and not really a high priority. So then they don't get built. So will this kind of rebalance the system in a way so that those applications that people need will get built, but developers will have more time to focus on the stuff that really matters? Is that a way to think about it?
I do. I think that's the right way to think about it. And then also just kind of to respond to the last kind of comments. I think that when we look at the cadence of delivery, there's less patience to go slower, and there's actually a desire to go much faster. So business KPIs are pushing for developers, DevOps teams, et cetera, to make sure that applications get created faster. So if you look at it from that perspective, there's a lower barrier of entry when you introduce tool sets that don't require the highly skilled developer to create. Now, what this does is it frees up the true developers and organizations to innovate and create those high value applications that do require impacts to financial systems, et cetera, as we just talked about. But I think that there's the lower, I don't want to call them lower value applications, but the applications that don't require as much innovation that can be handed off to others, that allows for that workload to be distributed faster. And, I think that when we look at it from that lens, this opens up new opportunities and skill sets for organizations. And it also increases the productivity and efficiency because you're not putting everything on the developer or the high valued developer that's focused on, that innovation, right? So that's where I think that there's a lot of shifts in the business. And I think that's really where we as organizations are kind of looking at these things going, okay, if we're going to move faster, you can't just keep dumping everything on the development organizations to do stuff because they just don't have enough time cycles in a day, right? So if you're going to do that in order to create those applications, you need to create those applications in a way that the resources can be expanded out to different people in the organization.
I think that also creates a better corporate culture within each organization. If the burden isn't being placed entirely on the developers to do these more tedious things that can be done elsewhere, I think that creates just a better culture for the organizations to communicate within each other and their departments and to kind of understand how to be more productive overall.
Well, 100%, and there's less finger pointing, right?
Yeah.
There's less finger. So if the request historically comes in from the line of business saying, create me an app that does X, Y, Z, and then the app doesn't do exactly what the line of business is asking for, now the line of business is responsible for creating their own app. Then it creates for a healthier culture.
Definitely.
All right. Well, let me argue the opposite of that. And John, maybe you want to weigh in here. So let me get this straight. One of the mantras coming out of the Valley is that we're going to build more software in the next 2 years than we built in the last decade. Okay. I can see how that's going to happen. But John, I don't know. Does that just mean there's just going to be a lot more crappy software running around that we're supposed to manage? I mean, the people
well, that kind of goes back.
Stuff.
It's an interesting parallel with all the companies that reared their heads. Some of them are very ugly heads, by the way, that came out during .com and also during AI. There are going to be some things that are going to be totally silly. There's some things that are just never going to gain any traction. I mean, even some of the stuff that's done with the best of intentions. For instance, on Wednesday, Salesforce announced its first fully autonomous AI agent for customer service. On the surface, it sounds really interesting, and perhaps it'll work really well. But the only thing that kind of I see as a downside is one of the analysts who was briefed on this told me that they did a survey on AI and language this spring, and only 6% of workers believe AI would automatically act for them without a human in the loop. And basically, most humans are not open to a fully autonomous AI system. So even the best of intentions from one of the best companies doesn't necessarily mean it's going to gain traction immediately. So yes, Mike, in a long-winded way, what I'm saying is there is going to be some great stuff, but there's going to be a ton of crap as well, as we've seen year after year after year. And that's just goes with the territory, right? There are a lot of people with a lot of ideas. Sometimes they don't have enough funding. Sometimes the execution goes slightly awry. Most of these companies, you think even back to Uber, they started off as something entirely different before they pivoted to success. So it's a trial and error process. And something's going to come along from someone we've never heard of that will break barriers, break through walls. It will be incredible, but we don't know yet. And that's why this stuff is so interesting to me.
Mark, what do you think? Are we on the cusp of, I don't know for what to call it, AI software crap fest? What's going on?
Software is always a crap fest.
Right.
Us software guys put the bugs in there for job security.
That's your secret, Mark. All right.
But seriously, I think that when you have an accelerant to the development of software, like we do with GitHub Copilot or OpenDevin and some of these other projects, we're just going to, it's easier to make software. The infrastructure to host that software, from things like Vercel to new things that are coming out from AWS, we're just going to have more. And when you have more, I don't think that there's any magic bullet so far to make that software better. It's just more software faster is where we're at right now. So more crap, to your point, Mike.
All right. But wait, there's more. Can I not build an AI model that will fix the crap created by the AI models and the humans? And there'll be like this other loop of things where I can kind of create another layer of AI that will fix things. Paul, what do you say?
I think that there's, checks and balances that have to go across organizations. I think, when I look at I go back to maturity of organizations. There are different, organizations that have fully mature and have fully implemented, AI solutions all the way to the right. And there's some that are all the way to the left that are just getting started and not sure what they need to do. But they're the ones in the middle are the ones that are there's some point that they're trying to drive through. And then when I relate it back to, I just did a study, which is somewhat related, but did a study on observability. And the study came back and it said that the tools that are used for observability is that most organizations using 6 to 15 tools to get those observability solutions in play. Okay. Well, they're building more they're using more tools to do the observability within their ecosystem. But when it comes to AI, they're doing a similar thing, right? They're using the different tools. There's all these different promises to deliver the best of the best type of thing, but they all have their weaknesses and their different use cases. And I think if you look at, for example, Claude just announced the availability of an Android app that harmonizes across web and iOS. That's great, but is Claude great for every use case? I would argue no. Is ChatGPT good for every use case? I would argue no. But if you want to create a tool or, say you want to create programming, you may want to use one AI tool for one thing. And if you want to create content creation, you may want to use another because it has that advantage over based on the learning and the LLM in the back end. But Mike, to your point, AI layered on top of AI, layered on top of AI, actionable insights is going to drive what the changes would be. So if you I think the AI on top of AI conversation, that's more of the complexity that's being introduced. And that's going to have to change over time because organizations are not going to want to have this complexity. And frankly, they're not going to want to have these fragile systems that are built on top of one another that'll just break. It's a house of cards.
All right. I'm going to leave the conversation there, but I will warn everybody, we are about to experience that proverbial thing called too much of a good thing. We'll be back in a minute.
I'm Bonnie Schneider, sustainability contributor to the Techstrong Group. I'm excited to introduce you to a groundbreaking new initiative from Techstrong Research, the Sustainability Pulse Meter. The Pulse Meter offers valuable insights into how environmental responsibility factors into tech purchasing decisions for key players in the industry. Position your company as a leader in the industry and differentiate from your competitors with the Sustainability Pulse Meter, offered exclusively from Techstrong Research. Welcome back to the Techstrong gang. Well, we've talked a lot about different ways to have more green operations, and that's kind of referred to often as green ops. And then we talk about being more financially responsible to optimize costs, known as FinOps. But how are these two processes and practices working together, and how are they being in applications also being able to work together to optimize costs, let's say, and energy efficiency in the cloud? I took a closer look at FinOps and GreenOps.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Schneider with your Ecotech Analyst Insights. Cloud management is evolving, with FinOps and GreenOps emerging as key practices. But what are they, and how do they relate to each other? Let's start with FinOps, which is an abbreviated term for financial operations, uniting finance, tech, and business teams to optimize cloud spending.
And GreenOps.
The focus here is to reduce the environmental impact of cloud operations. In essence, FinOps helps organizations spend wisely on cloud services, while GreenOps ensures those services are as eco-friendly as possible. U.S. data centers currently consume 2% of national power. Experts predict this will double by 2030. FinOps and GreenOps are not only counterparts, they actually work in harmony. That's because cost-effective cloud practices often align with eco-friendly choices. It's a win-win for saving money and protecting the environment. So how can organizations get on board? Start by tracking carbon output along with expenses. Consider migrating to greener cloud regions or adopting serverless architectures. Companies adopting FinOps and GreenOps will likely outperform competitors in both cost efficiency and environmental stewardship.
So optimizing these two practices together can be demonstrated in many ways. For example, one is data tiering, where we're automatically looking at data closer to or that we're using more often is automated. So that's stored in a more energy efficient area. But what's also interesting is implementing it into energy use and cost as well. I mean, one study found that if you optimize and you reach out to energy just at certain times a day versus other times a day for computing, you're going to save a lot in energy use and also in costs. And Google, Microsoft, and AWS are introducing processes that have FinOps and GreenOps working together in their practices and in their offerings. So this is a growing trend of presenting to the team of how to be more energy efficient as well as being more green in their processes.
On one level, I love this. It is overdue in high time. I mean, FinOps, you should be measuring energy. Energy is a cost issue, and then it comes out to carbon, and it all should be one kind of metric that I can track, or a set of metrics that are in the same dashboard. On the other side of this thing, FinOps, it's quote unquote relatively new concept, and basically it's IT and finance teams are getting together to define a set of metrics for tracking cloud consumption, infrastructure costs, and we act like this is a new idea. And the fact that it's a new idea is terrifying because, I mean, what the heck have we been doing for the last 10 years? Basically spending money on the cloud without anybody actually monitoring usage and cost or any of that stuff. I mean, Mark, are we really that much of a set of drunken sailors that we don't know what's going on?
I do think that especially in cloud services, we've gotten to a point where since it's usage based, and because there are so many different moving parts, it's really hard to draw a correlation between the delivery of service and where the cost is. A good example would be in like serverless applications. The serverless compute is very, very cheap, but the event-driven architecture behind it at 0.0005 seems like it's a cents per action seems really, really cheap, until you try and realize that there's hundreds of thousands or millions of those events happening every day. So I think it's an observability problem and then a mapping to your, finance. But I think we're getting much better at it than we were 5 years ago.
Paul, who's at fault here? And I ask this question because we have allowed developers to provision infrastructure at will on their own all these years. We gave them these lovely infrastructure as code tools, and they told us that they needed to go faster and they couldn't wait for centralized IT. And now, we got cost issues and we're killing the environment. So how do we fix this?
Yeah, well, I think that it's very clear that you have to have controls and governance in place when you're talking about self-regulation. Now, the days of submitting a help desk ticket and waiting 3 days for that change to occur, those are long since gone. I mean, organizations are not going to tolerate that. DevOps teams won't be able to reach their KPIs, and organizations just won't. It just won't work anymore if you do to go back to that model. But with that said, allowing self-service provisioning is a good thing, provided that you put the appropriate caps on top of the self-service provisioning. So if an organization says, "Hey, a DevOps team needs to provision more resources," they're not typically the ones that are responsible for the budget, so they're going to over provision every time, right? They're going to say, "I just need the resources to do the job," and honestly, rightfully so. They just need to get their job done and get it done appropriately. there needs to be awareness that organizations are putting in place, whether it's human capital or software stacks that allow it. There's plenty of tools out there that do analysis of the resources and utilization of those resources in order to provision the appropriate resources for those ebbs and flows of the workflow that occurs. That is something that needs to be explored and understood prior to doing the architecture design. It should be in the forefront of the design versus an afterthought.
I don't mean to disillusion you, but what he basically said is developers have no idea how much carbon is being generated.
That's right.
Application.
That's a really good point, and I think that that's one of the things that has to be looked at, which is why the tools that are being introduced now are making it for developers to be able to do the carbon calculations at the same time. That is being recognized from what I can tell by the vendors. So make it so it's simultaneous, make the reporting and the energy use completely clear and transparent as they go. So it is an evolving thing, and I agree that would be the first thing that the developer might say.
Mark, can we accomplish this with behavior and incentives and maybe asking people to do the right thing, or do we need to come down hard with a bunch of regulations that start with the words "thou shalt"?
So you said can, and the answer is yes, but will. And I think you hit on the right thing is when we started incentivizing people to, look at how they build things and how it affects the carbon footprint. Sure. But the other part of that is it also going to align with the business goals is the short-term thinking of companies that are building apps and addressing opportunities in the market consistent with the long-term concern of making sure that we don't turn ourselves into a sci-fi dystopian, bullet snow train or whatever, Snowpiercer, or one of those kind of situations where we kill the planet.
I think that there's definitely incentives, but one of the things that also comes into play is customers and employees within each company are also driving this. So you have the green ops and the FinOps coming together for those reasons as well. So if being more sustainable is making the employees and the customers happy as well, and it's doing better, as you said, for the planet, but it's also optimizing costs, that's when it becomes a win-win situation.
Right. John?
Oh, I was going to say, Bonnie brought something up that was really interesting about the employees kind of driving some of these initiatives. I think that's really interesting, and it's also really true out here, especially. A lot of people choose to work at companies based on not just the salary and the brand name and opportunities, but basically also what the company stands for. And a lot of people over the years have shifted allegiance from one company to another based on what that company does, if they're more green aware, which is long overdue, or they think about politically what they do on the side in terms of efficiency. I know it's like Mike, I'm quite cynical about a lot of this stuff, but it is at least heartening. It should have taken place years ago, but actually the fact that we are in this kind of FinOps era is encouraging. I mean, before it was just wanton overuse of energy without any thinking of the consequences, really. So anyway, I want to throw that in.
All right, let me come back to wanton overuse of energy without considering the consequences. Okay. Mark, we're building more data centers than ever. And a lot of this is being driven by AI. Mm-hmm. And I can't help but wonder if a lot of the compute resources being used to drive those AI applications warrant the amount of energy that's being created and consumed. Because let's be honest, did I really, really absolutely need to generate more carbon so I could write a better email?
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to our earlier point is that it's hard to measure. And what Bonnie is surfacing there is vendors are now, putting that correlation because you're not consuming something that is easily correlated to how much energy it's using. You're an IT staffer in a big company and you have to bring in the next application and without, connecting the dots. But, right now, if you look at the sector that is doing the best around AI beyond technology is utilities, because we're just sucking power, and all of these data centers are, maxing out very, very quickly.
Is that part of the problem here? Is that it seems like it's been an issue for all aspects of climate change, but we don't seem to be able to correlate outcomes to cause, and no one seems to know for sure or can say definitively, because other people seem to argue about it left, right, and center. But is this just part of a larger conversation where we're just not able to kind of connect those dots to Mark's point in a way that everybody will go, oh yeah, there's an absolute fact?
Well, that's funny you mention it, because I think that AI is actually one of the factors that's bringing this to the forefront. And I just want to also share this with the panel. If we're looking at AI and we're talking about we know we're using more energy and we are building more data centers. So how are we going to keep these data centers cooler? Well, that requires a lot of water. So that's bringing it, and we can all relate to wanting to save water resources. I think that's universal. So that's one area. And then it says, okay, well, we know we need to keep these data centers cooler. Maybe we should build them in places where there's cooler just geographically, like Finland. So that's what Google's doing. So I think that because of the obvious AI demands on energy, the obvious admitted use of water to cool data, that's helping to bring this to the forefront, where it's almost maybe years ago, well, we don't really know how much energy we're using. I think it was plausible deniability perhaps many years ago.
You weren't having this conversation during the cloud era, which it just kind of goes back to this. I'm sorry to interrupt, Bonnie. Yeah. It goes back to this AI phenomenon where people are so invested in learning about the technology and its repercussions and its impact that they think about other things, like the impact on the climate, etc. That's something that didn't happen, I don't think, nearly as much with previous cycles of technology waves.
Mark, follow me here for a minute, but it's awesome. There's going to be a data center in some cold place, but there's this thing called latency that gets involved, and suddenly I want to run my AI model at the point where the data is being created and consumed. So I push it out to the network edge, and that other Finland data center is just too far away. So now I got to move closer to something, and geography plays an issue here with the laws of physics, and then that messes up our whole energy equation. So do we need a better sense of the math here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I'll latch on to there is that whole latency thing. Is I think we're going to see more AI at the edge. I think that our personal devices will be able to handle a lot of the queries that we're sending to data centers, and they're going to run on, efficient Apple AI chips and the chips that are from Qualcomm that are going into the Android phones, and, we'll offload some of that. And I do think that we'll probably not have such a, corpus of AI that right now OpenAI is sort of the center of the AI model universe. And despite their, billions in money and partnership with Microsoft, it's still a very centralized amount of AI compute going on there.
I know. When I was a child, my father would come home and regularly yell at me about leaving the lights on. So are we not kind of getting the same thing with AI prompts? It's going to be like, how many prompts did you need? And do you realize how much energy you consume?
Well, ideally, that will be automated by AI. So you'll know the right amount of prompts, and maybe you'll be more conscious of it. But of course, if there's a reminder, yes, that would definitely help. But I do think that there are ways that are not, and I want to present this to the panel as well. I think that there are ways that can be automated, can be optimized, that we probably are right under your nose, but you're not realizing it. Like, for example, the example I used about time of day, energy use, what can be automated? What resources are we pulling right now that maybe we don't use very often that we can put a little less energy towards? I think that for maybe not the largest companies, but maybe the ones that haven't really brought this to the forefront, they may find that this FinOps and GreenOps combination will be able to force them to look at it from a different lens, where maybe in the end, which is the end result of saving money.
All right. So I think, we've been running along on some of our other sessions, and I think we kind of got to the point, because I think you're spot on. It's about the metrics.
Yeah.
And the more you can at least see what's going on, the more your behavior will change, even if you don't believe in whatever it is that you're being measured on. If other people do, you'll change your behavior if you're given the metrics, right? If somebody kind of tells you something, you'll at least think about it. And that's about as much as we can hope for at the moment. Hey guys, thanks for being on the show. I want to plug our next segment here is with Bob Reselman, who's going to be, well, Bob, he has issues, and he's looking at the fact that, well, do you really have choice when you only have 3 choices, or how many choices should you have? And a lot of times, we can find ourselves, even in the age of the cloud, we have t-shirt sizes, small, medium, and large. And does that just kind of narrow our thinking? And so Bob's going to kind of open your mind a little bit, I hope. And after Bob comes the rest of the lineup for the Techstrong TV gang today, or the Techstrong TV series, I should say. And by all means, check that out because, well, it's going to just be more awesome and riveting conversations. Thank you all for spending some time with us. We'll see you next time.
Okay, so this is a story about choice, and it goes like this. It seems that we live in a duopoly or triopoly sort of world where we have choices between 2 or 3 things. So, for example, we have like Amazon or Walmart or Coke and Pepsi or Fender and Gibson, Intel, AMD, FedEx, UPS, Mac, Windows, or maybe 3 choices, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. It makes sense that things consolidate because you really do need huge market share in order to stay in business. The side players are just the side players. It really is the big companies that can command almost monopolistic market shares that can succeed or even survive. So it seems that our choices in things are a little limited. Now, that's not to say that we don't have broad choice. For example, in the database world, we're seeing a lot more activity because Postgres is taking on a commanding market presence, whereas before it used to be Oracle or MySQL or Microsoft SQL Server. There's a lot more diversity in the database world. But in technology or in general consumer stuff, it really is duopoly, triopoly. So what does this mean? Do we really have choice? Well, yeah, we can choose Coke or Pepsi. And what's our criteria for Coke or Pepsi? Oh, I like the red can as opposed to the gray can. Who knows? But it's not a lot of introspection, which leads me to this point. Once you start reducing choice, that there's only 1 or 2 or maybe 3 things to choose from, you might really start losing the ability to analyze things in order to make a choice. If everything sort of looks alike and they just have different names, what real choice is there? Why do I have to think about it? I'll just go with whatever color I happen to like. And that sort of degrades the decision-making process, particularly in light of other things, such as maybe Tory and Labor and Republican and Democrat. Maybe what's the real big difference? And there's arguments to be made there. But the fact is we don't have a wide variety of choice. And that limits our ability to think about making choices. Does it matter? I don't know, but I think it's something worth thinking about.